Imperialism, making a country more powerful by dominating other regions both politically and economically. The issue actually began in 1986 when the first Northern Revolution took up arms in a local southern base. However, the origins of this north-south boundary go back into the late 1800s in a time period that everyone had thought of as the age of imperialism. Europeans noticed that Africa had certain resources, and that's when the colonization began. There was much exploitation of the Africans and a beginning of spiritual values by Christian missionaries. When Europeans saw these riches, competitions grew. 14 nations met at the Berlin Conference in 1884. When divisions were made, the Native Americans and small ethnic groups were given little say. European civilization had some rapid expansion and significant development around the whole world throughout the last part of the 19th century. European nation-states had become extremely powerful because of the instrumental advancement in industrialization and organizational productivity. Britain even had better weapons. They also had a drug quinine in 1829, which kept them from being infected by malaria. However, in Africa, all there was were issues by economic weakness and political. In the 1800s, Europeans began to gain control over regions of Africa. This was benefiting the Europeans. However, on the colonist side, they were neglected, abused, threatened, and in some cases, they were even killed. People thought of a few causes of imperialism. One of them was The White Man's Burden, a poem written by Rudyard Kipling in 1899. It basically said that the white man had the burden and responsibility of bringing the blessings of their superior civilization to the inferiority of the non-European world. This poem even influenced this 1890s advertisement of Pierce soap, which encouraged white people to teach cleanliness.
The poem is a mindset that is absolutely stunning. It depicts both the colonizer and the colonist, as Kipling says, take up the white man's burden, send forth the best ye breed, go bind your sons to exile, to serve your captives' need. He puts it as if the colonizing nation makes a great sacrifice. The colonizers are what they look at as the burden, and the colonists as half devil and half child. The whole perspective is from the whites. Oh, your civilization is terrible. We have to give you ours, and that is our burden.
Britain took a vast chunk of Africa, Cairo to Cape Town, Nigeria, and a few western regions. In 1984, making up the borders of Uganda, the British Empire imposed boundaries around many kingdoms and diverse ethnic groups. In South Uganda, the Bantu-speaking people were given an educational, economic, and political benefit. The northern groups, more specifically the Akalai and the Langai, were recruited for the military and police positions. There was another idea of the cause of imperialism by the people, known as social Darwinism, created by Charles Darwin in the 1870s. According to the New York Public Library, by the late 19th century, Darwin's evolutionary theories provided a new justification for exploitation. His books called On the Origin of Species and The Descent of Man were revolutionary items in the European thought. Not only did Darwin theorize that animals and plants evolved into different species through natural selection, he claimed that humans were animals themselves, subject to the same selection process that played out in nature. Social Darwinism was influenced by survival of the fittest. This said that the animals that are better designed for an environment will be the ones who are likely to survive and reproduce. This theory answers the questions, why are people rich and others poor? Why dark and light-skinned? Why do people live in tall buildings and grass huts? The transatlantic slave trade ending in the late 1800s had drastically reduced the populations of African societies. This event encouraged many to enter tribal warfare. Most of the European people were dying from diseases brought over from Europe. They were unsuited to the climate and were unable to undergo tropical diseases. Africans, however, were remarkable workers. They had thorough experience of agriculture, were used to a tropical climate, and they could be worked very hard on plantations. The triangular trade system was used in slave trade. Numerous manufactured goods and material were sent from Europe to Africa. These goods were exchanged for slaves. The British ruled the Arabs of the North and the blacks of the South as two different colonies. They combined the areas before independence in 1956. The outcome was 4 major massacres. Brutal force was the only way out. The political and economic goals of the imperialist nations had furthered at times. The Europeans had often oppressed and abused Native American groups. Some of the most brutal oppression happened in the Congo. King Leopold, a wealthy man, had misused the land as well as the people. Africans had to work laboriously with ivory and rubber. The terms of working were terrible, and the African population had a major decrease.
And if you look at the bigger sense of a colonizer coming into a particular area or country, you can't help but stamp yourself a little bit on the rights of those people you're coming in on, because you have a different leadership. You have a different group of the African countries that were being colonized by, they were seen as uncivilized, and the mostly English, but also Spanish and French and the others who came to settle in the U.S. saw themselves as a way to make these uncivilized people civil. And I think that was a very similar mindset among some Europeans when they went into Africa. But that whole mindset presupposes the people you're colonizing aren't civil. So what does that mean to them? When they're being told, we need to be the ones to tell you how to live your life in a way we think is proper, you can't help but impose a bit on their rights and on their culture. And from our 21st century perspective, I think we could see that that's not the best course of action.
The French took an east-west section of also taking Madagascar. The Belgians took Rwanda, Burundi, and the Congo, in what a historical figure Joseph Conrad thought was a wireless scramble. He was a British sailor who saw the cons of imperialism in Africa and was sent to write a novel about the bad parts. His novel, Heart of Darkness, is about a journey taken in a great river down the Belgian River in Congo. In the book, Marlowe, a businessman, is on a hunt to find what happened to a station chief named Curtis. When he found Curtis, he was absolutely shocked. Curtis had become a psychopath, acting as he was some type of god. He commanded that everyone must obey him, and if they didn't, it would cost them the price of death. Conrad's novel was a great inspiration to numerous European readers, but they still could not get the age of imperialism. The Portuguese took over Angola, Mozambique, and Guinea-Bissau by the end of the 1970s. Italy took Libya, Eritrea, and Somalia. The Germans wiped out Cameroon and Tanzania, committing the first genocide of the 20th century in Namibia. By the end of the 19th century, Liberia and Ethiopia were the only countries that were not colonized.
European imperialists had the responsibility of using the land and the resources of the land wisely, but instead what they did was they exploited the African people, their land resources, as well as the African colonies themselves.